people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
I'd rather get paid half the amount and fight twice as often.
Don't say that.
I'd love it.
So
I just love fighting. I want to have 10 fights a year.
Which is tremendous, and I think a lot of people respect that about you. But if they called you up right now and said, we've got a date, I don't know, that LA card.
Yeah.
You would do it?
Yeah.
Really? Even though your hand's a little busted?
I'd have to check on the hand, but to be honest, yeah, I would.
The activity is what you're searching for.
I just feel like I would be improving at an even more rapid rate if I could just move straight into another fight.
Right.
Activity matters, folks. Activity matters. If you ask veteran boxing scribe Stephen Kimothy here on this channel, we talk about it all the time, how activity matters and how yesterday's fighter was more well-known than today's fighter because yesterday's fighter was a lot more active. And we're not just talking about prospects looking to amass experience, even very big-name fighters, marquee fighters.
1997, Oscar De La Hoya fought 5 times. He was already a huge draw by then. Already a big name. He was the golden boy. And in 1997, that guy fought 5 times.
Back in 83, Marvelous Marvin Hagler fought 3 times. He fought 3 times that year. That was the same year he fought Roberto Duran.
Fighters used to be more active.
Sugar Ray Leonard in 1980. 1980, that guy fought 3 times. 2 of those fights were the Duran fights, but he fought 3 times that year.
He was already a well-known fighter then, too.
So what all the activity does is keep you on everybody's mind, because every time they turn around, you're fighting.
They're always seeing you, always hearing about you.
What all the activity does, it keeps you talked about, it keeps you sharp.
Ready to fight.
See, a lot of fighters in today's day and age struggle with weight. Struggle with making the weight, because if you're only fighting one or maybe 2 times a year with a lot of months in between, what are you gonna do when you're not fighting? What are you gonna do?
You're gonna eat.
You're gonna get fat. You're gonna eat. That's what you're gonna do. Whereas if you're fighting more often, you're closer to your fight weight because you just fought, and you fight often enough that getting there isn't as difficult. That there are no long spells of inactivity. When I hear young Sky Nicholson talk about the virtues of activity, think about this.
What?
Another unbeaten up-and-comer.
What's her name?
At her same weight, Sophie Elish of Germany. Sophie debuted as a professional in 2019. She debuted before Sky back there in 2019. Sky don't debut until 3 years later in 2022. But who's further along in their career?
Sky.
Who's got more fights?
Sky.
Who's more talked about? More well-known? Even among people that don't necessarily watch women's boxing as much as I or you. Who's more well-known? Sky Nicholson or Sophie Elish?
Sky.
Sky is. Sky Nicholson. Even though Sophie Elish debuted 3 years before Sky, she had a head start. Sky's more well-known because Sky fights more often. The virtues of activity.
Sophie had a head start. She debuted 3 years before Sky Nicholson, but who's a champion?
Sky Nicholson. You ask yourself, well, if activity matters and activity is so beneficial, why aren't more fighters more active?
Contract minimums.
In the modern day and age, you see a lot of exclusivity deals that tie a fighter to a particular platform. To make sure they don't go somewhere else, fight under somebody else's banner, they give them exclusivity deals. To achieve that exclusivity, to get it, they give the fighter big contract minimums. That every time you fight, you're going to make X amount of dollars. The caveat is that only enables you to get the fighter out there, but so often because it's so expensive. So if you're paying a Shakur Stevenson $3 million a fight,
You're probably only gonna see the guy 1, maybe 2 times a year.
and even though every fight doesn't yield the same commercial value, you still have to kick out a lot of money to keep a fighter like that active because of that contract minimum. It's a very expensive situation that results in fighters that maybe they are accomplished in their own way, but they're not well known.
As well known as yesterday's fighters because they're not as active. as yesterday's fighters. You don't see them often enough.
So when I see Sky saying what she's saying, and just the virtues of activity, I mean, think about it. She's more well-known than any unbeaten up-and-comer in the featherweight division, and there are several, but she's further along in her career than they are, and she's more well-known and talked about than they are because she fights more often.
She's more active than they are.
Activity matters, and she's a shining example of that, whether you like her or not, or her manner of fighting.
All the stuff about Amanda Serrano.
You have that to talk about. Whereas if you mention the names of either Sophie Leash or Karis Ardingstall or even Raven Chapman to a lesser extent, the boxing community at large is not as familiar with those fighters. They don't know them.
And that ain't good.
So Sky makes a good point about wanting to be more active and fighting as much as possible based on the available opportunities.
Kid makes a good point.
Men's welterweight news. On the heels of his win this past weekend and what was his Matchroom debut, Jaron Ennis posted a PSA for all of his supporters and everybody that was there. He said, "Thank God for another one. I couldn't have done it without him. I had a lot of fun last night. It felt great being back in the ring after a year layoff. Glad I was able to knock that rust off. I can't wait to get right back in there. I know it wasn't my sharpest, but next fight, I promise I'm gonna be on point. I appreciate everyone that came out. Y'all showed up and showed out for my homecoming. We made history last night. The love was real. #legendary nights. Now, we're on a mission. Bigger and better fights are coming. It's time to collect the rest of these belts."
I like that idea for Jaron Ennis, but I don't appreciate the mixed signals. So after the fight, His Excellency said he got in contact with Jaron Ennis about a potential Crawford fight and that he would love to put it on.
And after the fight, Jaron Ennis himself mentioned Terence Crawford by name, just so that Eddie Hearn can turn around and say he's not gonna fight Crawford until he unifies this division.
That's what he said.
So, if a Terence Crawford fight doesn't happen until Boots is undisputed welterweight champion, how long is it going to take him to get those other belts? Because Mario Barrios, he's in talks for a Pacquiao fight. A Montestanionis, he re-signed to the PBC.
You're saying Jaron Ennis must unify before facing Crawford at 154.
Then why bring him up? Why even talk about him? Why even mention him?
I'm not a fan of the mixed signals.
Jaron Ennis doesn't need them. Promoter Eddie Hearn believes that his fighter, Jaron Ennis, must look to unify titles in the welterweight division before moving up to junior middleweight to face Terence Crawford. Ennis put on a dominant display in front of a sizable crowd in Philadelphia. In his first fight with Hearn's Matchroom Boxing, the fighter dismantled challenger David Evanesian, forcing the Armenian's corner to throw the towel at the end of the fifth. Ennis retained his IBF welterweight title with the victory and is now eyeing a potential unification later on this year. Crawford is the only other title holder in the division, but given his upcoming move to 154 to face Israel Madrimov in August, the belts are likely to become vacant. Hearn believes Ennis must aim to unify before moving up to join Crawford one division further north.
Then can the mixed signals, if the priority now is unifying the division, stick to that and stop giving us mixed signals about a Crawford fight, because it just looks like you're clout chasing.
Jaron Ennis' next fight could come as early as October on the huge Artur Beterbiev versus Dimitri Bivol card in Saudi. The number one priority is to unify the division, said Hearn. He's gonna go to 154 at some point, but you don't really want to go until you take care of business. His Excellency Turki Al-Sheikh asked me, "Do you think Boots would fight Crawford?" I said, "Yeah, but that's for next year. We are going to fight in October or November." I said to His Excellency, "Maybe if you want, we will co-main event on Beterbiev versus Bivol in October, or we could come back here. Crawford versus Boots at the ballpark."
Which got me really excited.
So here's what I think.
Listen,
Over 14,000 people showed up to see Boots fight David Amnesia.
it's Evanesia.
Boots likely hit the guy so hard, he gave him amnesia. And that was just for a David Amnesia fight. You understand that? That wasn't even a unification match with another champion. The encounter with Ennis and Evanesian attracted an official crowd of 14,199 people, the largest for a fight in Philadelphia since 14,930 people watched Marvin Hagler outpoint Benny Briscoe in '78. Fans were reportedly still lining up at the box office for tickets while the two fighters walked into the ring. The event surpassed even promoter Hearn's expectations, and he believes the experience in a packed arena will be good preparation for a fight against the big names in the sport. A trainer is only as good as his fighter, but a promoter is only as good as his fighter, Hearn said. The reality is, you need quality fighters, you need a big TV deal, and you need great fighters. What we saw tonight, I'd love to take all the credit, and Boots would, but no one anticipated that. Honestly, they were queuing in on his ring walk out here tonight. It was unbelievable. We've done homecomings, and it isn't easy. I know he thought his timing was off, but it's hard. In a fight, you've got to be really zoned in. That was a really good experience for him tonight, because next time he's in front of a crowd like that, it'll be a much bigger test.
So in Philly, you've got the Lincoln Financial Fieldway, the ideal site for what could be a bigger fight against a relatively bigger name, say in a unification match with the likes of N.A. Montestanionis. If Mario Barrios is otherwise preoccupied with a Pacquiao fight, Eddie Hearn needs to do whatever he has to do to get a Montes in the ring.
On the premise of go big or go home, that's one way you can do it, because you just put 14,000 asses in 14,000 seats with little more than a David Amnesia fight. So the desire to see Boots fight is definitely there. That you don't need to keep attaching his name to Terrence Crawford's and dangling that carrot in front of the boxing fans. I don't know if the promoters are aware, but the fans really resent that.
Insulting our intelligence and wasting our time.
Because in the time that it takes you to get those other alphabet titles, who knows what Terrence Crawford might be doing? He's 36, going on 37.
You don't need to blow smoke up our ass about a Crawford fight.
Get Boots the other belts. That's what you need to talk about, and that's what you need to do.
Relax.
Don't make the same mistake David Benavidez is making his entire career and all the focus about some other guy, some other fight with some other fighter that may or may not happen. Boots doesn't need it.
There's a grassroots demand to see this guy fight, and he stands a very good chance of becoming his division's undisputed champion. You just have to get him the fights.
That you don't need to make his career about anybody else. Him and Terrence are in very different places right now.
So don't make empty promises.
In men's middleweight news, unified middleweight champion Janibek Alimkhanalai has been ordered to provide a medical report. Unified middleweight champion Janibek Alimkhanalai is treating his dehydration and hospitalization that triggered the scrapping of Saturday's fight as a good lesson, and will take measures to avoid such an alarming episode again. His manager told Boxing Scene on Monday, Kazakhstan's Alimkhanalai will hire a nutritionist and take a far more serious approach to his next weight cut, as he fully intends to make up his fight with challenger Andre Mikhailiovic of New Zealand. At this level, it has to be a completely different game, Alimkhanalai manager Aegis Klimas explained on Monday night.
So Janibek didn't have a nutritionist already? Why not?
Because that's money out of your pocket. That's extra money you have to pay out to that nutritionist from your fight purse. Not everybody hires one, but at this level, just like Aegis Klimas said, you kinda have to. Earlier on Monday, the WBO stipulated that Alimkhanalai is ordered to submit to medical testing and provide a detailed medical report of his condition from Friday night, including findings, prognosis, and an updated report on when he'll be cleared to compete again. Klimas said Alimkhanalai is seeing a physical Tuesday. There'll be no problem with anything. He's not the first fighter to faint, and we will reschedule the Mikhailiovic fight, Klimas said. I feel so sorry for Mikhailiovic coming all this way from New Zealand for this fight at the Palms in Vegas just to end up not fighting at all.
New Zealand is basically a world away.
And my initial reaction to the news was it might be time for Janibek to move up, that if he's to the point he's collapsing before the fight even takes place from being emaciated, trying to make the weight, it may be time to go to 168.
The problem with that is that it would be very difficult, even more difficult for Janibek to get meaningful fights at 168
than it has been at 160, because if he were to move up to 168 and vacate his 2 alphabet titles, he'd just be another guy, just some guy up there with no belts and no leverage. I thought what all of this heralded was a move upstairs to 168, but as luck would have it, Janibek isn't moving up. In his own words via his social media, he said, "Thank you for all the support. I'm fine now. I'll recover in a couple of weeks and come back. And very important news, I'll stay fighting at 160. I have unfinished business there."
He still wants to unify that division.
He said, "When I had a problem with my weight, I heard that all the middleweight boxers gathered and celebrated. Sorry that I ruined your holiday. The king is back and will rule the middleweight division.
Confirming that it was a weight issue.
You don't need to be Dr. Oz or Dr. Spock to know that if this guy collapsed ahead of the fight, it has everything to do with a hard cut and being emaciated, being depleted.
But he's not moving up. He's hiring a nutritionist and he's gonna stay at 160.
He said, Adames and Lara, take your time to celebrate. I will fight at middleweight and collect all 4 titles.
Inshallah.
To which Carlos Adames responded, I don't celebrate others' downfall. I don't care which division you fight in. You could go up to heavyweight, and I would go up to shut you the hell up. Talk to your promoter. Davis versus Lomachenko next. At the weight that you want.
What about Gervonta Davis and Vasyl Lomachenko?
Well, we all know what the reports are. That currently Team Davis and Team Loma are negotiating a fight with each other set to go down sometime in the fall. What Carlos is proposing is that a fight between him and Janibek be placed on the undercard, and that's not a bad idea. We just saw Queensbury versus Matchroom. What about Top Rank versus PBC? Make a tournament out of it.
It's not a bad idea.
I want to say that historically, top-ranked fighters usually beat the crap out of PBC guys, PBC fighters. That's how that usually goes. And when it comes to this fight between Janibek and Carlos, I actually favor Janibek to win that.
Carlos is good, multifaceted, skilled. He's strong, he's athletic, but I don't think he takes a good punch.
I think he's chinny.
And he didn't look nothing special a few weeks ago on the undercard of Gervonta Davis' fight with Frank Martin. Opposite the ring, Terrell Gausha, Carlos looked bang average.
Yeah, well, Janibek looked bang average with Denzel Bentley a few fights ago.
Yeah, he did, but I still think he punches harder than Carlos Adames.
Suppose it makes things a little bit more interesting that Janibek may now be struggling with the weight, and that may so affect his punch resistance moving forward, makes the contest a little bit more even, though push comes to shove. I'd go with Janibek to knock out Carlos.
It's the weirdest thing.
I think Carlos is a more multifaceted, more malleable fighter than Janibek Alimkhanalai, who sometimes seems monotonous and robotic, just throwing the same combination. That Carlos has more layers to his game, but as a physical specimen, I don't think he's as durable as Janibek Alimkhanalai. That Janibek can get through with something and put him down. And what about Lara? What do you think about Janibek's chances against Lara, the only other champion at the weight?
Oh, Lara's just fucking old.
Guy's in his early 40s. He might be older than that. For years now, he's been fighting the Greg Vendettis and Cornflake Lamanas of the world, the Michael Zarafas. That's what's kept him in the winner's bracket. A combination of low-level opponents and a sparse schedule of activity. But if you put him in there with a live one, his age is going to show up.
Father Time is gonna tap him on the shoulder and remind him he's in his 40s.
I like Janibek's chances against Carlos Adames or Arislandi Lara. The real obstacle here is making the fights, getting them done, because Janibek's with Top Rank and Carlos is with the PBC. But if those two outfits are working together to make a Davis versus Loma fight, I don't see why they can't put this unification match on the undercard. It makes perfect sense.
So get it done.